Joel Riley, News Radio 610 WTVN. So when you look at the big picture, there's always back and forth when it comes to politics, elections. Here in Ohio, looks like no golden week with comment. Law expert Byron Henry is on the line. And Byron, how does this thing shore up as far as you're concerned?
Well, the way it's looking is that because of the split on the Supreme Court, it seems 4-4 in these voting rights cases. It seems like whoever wins in the lower court, meaning the Court of Appeals or the District Court, that is the decision that's going to stick until full review by the Supreme Court, meaning there's not going to be any stays or anything done before this election, or we get another justice on the Supreme Court. Because if the way it plays out, if the left wins on a voting rights claim with respect to these regulations and ballot issues with respect to election regulations, then there's not 5 votes to issue a stay at the Supreme Court. But likewise, such as in the Ohio case, there's not 5 votes from the other side to issue a stay. So there's probably a 4-4 split in most cases on the court. Therefore, whatever the lower court does, that's the way it's going to stick for this election in November. So do you feel like, can we trust the lower court decision? Well, the problem with the lower court decisions, I think, is regionally and politically, they tend to skew a little bit more. I don't want to say partisan, because I think the judges are doing their best to get it right in most cases. But the issue is that the Voting Rights Act leaves a lot of leeway to judges. The Voting Rights Act has the disparate impact or effects provision, so that basically you can find that if you can get any study or any data or any expert to come out and say, as a result of this law, fewer minorities are going to get to vote, assuming that it's a legitimate either study or some sort of data, statistics, then that gives leeway to that court to basically strike down or invalidate the voting restriction, which obviously is a little bit too broad. It leaves too much power in the hands of judges when the Constitution leaves election regulations to states, and therefore the Supreme Court is going to have to weigh in and set a standard, a reasonable standard under the Voting Rights Act to control all of the lower court decisions. And the issue is, remember, these are constitutional issues. Yep. Because the Constitution doesn't give you a right to vote early or a right to vote on Sunday or a right to vote without an ID. The Constitution basically, if there was one election day, which there used to be, by the way, it would be, quote, constitutional. These are voting rights cases where the law basically is, you've got to be careful if you do anything with respect to voting rights that has a disparate impact on minority voters. So you say all that, and I'm just thinking in the back of my mind, vacant Supreme Court seat. So in your opinion, should that be something that should be buttoned up? I mean, should they move forward, give a thumbs up or a thumbs down on Mr. Garland? Should we get that seat taken care of? Or are we willing as a nation to realize it's going to be 4-4 ad nauseum, and we're just going to have to go with the lower court rulings? Well, there's a couple of schools of thought on that. One is if you happen to be on the conservative side or Republican, you're happy with the 4-4 split, because that means that you're going to have to convince another justice to come over and vote with you to be a 5-3 decision in order to get anything done. And so you're thinking to yourself, we don't need to, that's fine with us if we're Republicans and conservatives. It depends on who the nominee is. On the other hand, there are 9 seats on the Supreme Court. The Constitution does provide for a Supreme Court. It's set at 9, and in a lot of ways, we need some resolution to these cases. I understand that both sides want them to be resolved in their favor, but you can't have the law across the country in 13 or 14 different courts of appeals across the country. You can't have it where in Ohio you can do certain things, and in Louisiana you can do certain things, and in California the law is this, and in Texas you can't have ID, but in Wisconsin you can. That's not healthy for the country, and in fact that's not the way the system was set up. The Supreme Court does need to have the number of justices to make a decision for the entire country, regardless of that outcome. Well, and yeah, you're right. You feel like at its core some continuity would be good for everybody. But, well, I know there's plenty of ground to cover. And Byron, I appreciate you bringing us up to speed on where we are today. Byron Henry, he's a law expert here on News Radio 610 WTVN.